All right, so on to the restricted list. The restricted list are cards that can only be...
Give me that. You're not allowed to have toys.
Welcome back to the Warlord Card Gamer. Today, of all things, we're going to be talking about some news, and some news that's generated some controversy. In the last week, I think it was announced that the Guardians of the Storm have updated their bans list. Warlord is a game that's obviously not being produced at the moment, and because of that, that means that there's no company that basically runs the formats or the rules or anything. In Warlord, there are only two natural formats. There's the last format that was made by a company, which is 4th edition, so any cards that were in that arc of cards or that were printed. And then there's the open format, which has traditionally always been a format where if you have it physically as a card, you can play it. So the problem with that format is that it's broken. So the idea of being able to play with everything you have is awesome. The problem is that there's definitely some cards that are very unbalanced in that format. And so what's been happening in the last, I guess, 10 years now since Warlord hasn't been produced, is that slowly but surely a player-run initiative was developed, and it became the Guardians of the Storm. The Guardians of the Storm looked at both of these formats and said, well, 4th edition is a very balanced format, but it's relatively limited because it obviously doesn't have all of the cards that were ever printed available. And then open is a great idea, but in practice, in real life, it is very not fun. It's an NPE, it's a negative player experience. And so what they wanted to do is basically grab the idea of open and then try and cull out the cards that are creating that negative experience. So overall, the format of Ancients was established, I think a few years ago now, and that's basically been the running standard of, I guess, tournaments that we've been running, or that they've been running, sorry, the Guardians of the Storm. They've been running tournaments roughly on a monthly basis, and they kind of bounce around with different ideas, but generally, Ancients is the go-to format. And so the big news is that they have updated the ban list, which is crazy because, again, there haven't really been any new cards that have been coming out. And so the reason they've updated the ban list is that the community has come up with new combos of cards, and we've realized, or I actually have a few of them that I've experienced personally, but the community has realized that there are certain things that are also not really great. And so in the spirit of keeping a format that is fun to play and that allows for a good variety of decks, they have updated the ban list, and that's what we're going to talk about today. There are 3 different types of lists in the ban list. There's the reserved list, which is cards that cannot or can no longer start in play. There are the restricted list, which only allows you to play 1 copy of the card in your deck versus the 3 copies that you're normally allowed to play. And then there's the outright ban list, cards that are just no longer welcome in the format. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to start with the cards that they've added to the reserved list. So these are cards that cannot start in play. The first card that they've added is Arden Alice. Arden Alice is a level 1 elf. He's an undead, and his ability is, after entering play from the discard pile, perform a melee strike. Now they've added him into the reserve list because the problem is that if you start with him in play, you're basically guaranteeing to generate tons of melee strikes from the get-go, so basically in the first turn. And so what they're trying to do here is limit that because it was very easily abusable in an elf deck. There's tons of different cards like the Kargas Dythanis. Kargas Dythanis is an incredibly powerful card as is, but his ability to basically just bring Arden Alice back from the dead outright just by playing him is just one example of how easy it is to bring him back relatively consistently. By not starting him in play, you now actually have to draw him, which again, you might not draw him on the first hand. And if you do happen to draw him in your first hand on the first turn, that still is 1 less card that you would have had than if he had started in play, which means like if he had started in play, you got 5 cards that could somehow regenerate him. Now, if you do draw him, you're only going to have 4. And if you happen to be playing more than 1 in the deck because you want him to come out, you might actually be drawing 2 in the first hand. So now you only have 3 things that might be able to regenerate him. So in general, it is a powerful thing. I do, whenever I designed any deck that would use him, personally, it is definitely almost like a guaranteed, like any deck that is an elf deck that is focused on undead regeneration, and recursion, you will almost guaranteed start him in the first rank, or at 1x in your first starting army, because he is really powerful. All right, so the next two cards on the reserved list is for cards that aren't allowed to start and play anymore, are both related. They're both cards that are used in decks that are mostly just golden gun decks, which basically means you want to make, you want to get a specific set of cards to be able to win the game kind of outright. And the problem with that being a non-pleasant or negative player experience, sorry, is that it's just not cool. The whole point is this is supposed to be an epic battle of like one army versus another. And so if you can win a game in the first, I don't know, 3 or 4 actions because you drew the right card, it just doesn't feel quite right. Like you didn't have a fighting chance to be able to play the game. And so that's why they've removed these from from cards that you can start and play. The first one we're going to be looking at is Brel. Brel is a Nothrog level 2 druid, cleric, and his ability says, react after a Nothrog siege character hits with a melee or range strike, kill Brel, the melee or range strike inflicts an additional wound. So it's funny because obviously here, the cost, which is supposed to be a high cost, is to kill the character. But the problem here is that doesn't matter, because if you actually hit with that particular siege character in these decks, you win the game. So it doesn't matter that you're killing, two of the characters in your deck. And so there are actually 2 level 4 siege characters that you can play, and they can target characters anywhere in the game, basically. And so if you happen to draw one of those, or draw into those, or even better, if you're playing the Warlord Conduit, then you can basically search for one of them, put it on the top of your deck, and then draw a card with all the many ways that you can draw cards in the game to grab that siege engine. So it's almost basically guaranteed to be getting one of those in the first turn. The 2 siege engines that you can be grabbing are the Conflagration and Trebuchet. So both of those are, again, cards that can target characters anywhere in the game. There is also a new card that came out in 4th edition, which we'll add here in a minute. I don't remember what it's called, but it's an item that gives siege characters +8 to their rolls. So even more almost guaranteed. It's basically just don't roll a 1 and you've killed your opposing warlord. The other card that was restricted is reserved, is Nelwys. Nelwys is a level 2 elf, and his ability says, spend react after an elf in the rank behind this one targets a non-spell range strike. The range strike inflicts an extra wound if it hits. And the warlord that this goes with usually is Avrisk Glyn. Avrisk Glyn is a rogue and a wizard, and his ability is react after Avrisk Glyn performs a scribed action, perform a +4 range strike against a target of that action. And so he naturally has scribed +7 with 9 skill, which means that you have to roll a 4 or better to be able to scribe a card to him. And there are tons of spells out there that target characters anywhere in the game that may not have a way to actually win the game outright, but you don't need it. You just need to target an opposing character anywhere in the game. But there's a spell that allows you to remove skill from an opposing warlord, or an opposing character rather, anywhere in the game. And that spell it's not incredibly powerful alone, but with Avrisk Glyn's ability, you can scribe that spell to him, and then you can target an opposing warlord with that spell, reducing their skill by whatever amount. And now you can react doing that range strike, and if you can hit with that range strike, now you just spend, or rather you spend the 2 Nelwys beforehand, and if you hit, you win the game. So those are the cards that have been added to the reserve list. All right, on to the restricted list. So the restricted list are cards that you can only have 1 copy of in your deck now instead of 3. So the first card we're going to be looking at is Suicidal Charge. Now, honestly, neither of these cards were actually cards that I personally played very much with or ever. I didn't see them as being too powerful. And specifically this one, Suicidal Charge, was a card that I very much underestimated. I actually did get hit by it on the Warlord tournament as well, the championship tournament. And I did realize that it was powerful, but it didn't feel like it was game-changing. It is a pain. So, what does it do? Suicidal Charge says, spend order, move this character forward 1 rank. If this moves the character into the first rank, he or she may immediately perform an attack without spending and with an additional melee strike at +1. This character is killed at the end of the turn. So, the problem with this is that there are characters, 2nd level characters, that you can move forward, do that with, and it doesn't really matter that they die after it, and they are very offensive characters. So we'll start with the first one. The first one is the Bloodworm. The Bloodworm is a level 2 character. It's a very vanilla character, but as you can see very quickly there, it has 4+0 range strikes. So now you're spending forward, and now you're getting 5 strikes in one action, and if you happen to have a Warlord that gives it attack somehow, I believe Crucian Vaskar, if you had spent him, give your monsters +3, now you've got 5 strikes at +3 and then 1 at, or 4+3s and 1+4. If you happen to have a Mass Blessing out, you know, this can get really out of hand very quickly. So I can see, I didn't play against this, but I can see where that could be very not cool, especially in like the first or second, third action in your first turn. The second card where this gets easily abused is Medusa's Blaze. Medusa's Blaze, starting in your starting army, has 2 strikes, a +5 and a +3, and it says, after Medusa's Blaze attacks, kill the Blaze and search your deck for a card named Medusa's Inferno and put it into play spent in this rank. And so, in that case, I guess the cost of using Suicidal Charge by actually killing the character at the end of the turn is completely irrelevant and negated, because you actually get to use Medusa's Blaze to go look for the level 4 character that you now place into the front rank in the first turn. And so it is definitely very powerful. And so what they've done is they've restricted it, so now there can only be 1 in the deck. Again, I can see why they did that. I personally, so far, don't have anything wrong with any of these decisions they've made. I think that they're pretty good. Okay, so the second restricted card that they've added to the restricted list is Trade Routes. It's another card that, again, I've never really played with. I acknowledge the power level of the card, and I'm sure that there are people out there that definitely abused it. I personally never did, so I don't have any first-hand experience of how powerful it could be, and I've never really played against people who played it, but again, I do see where this could be a problem. And so what does it do? Trade Routes is a level 3 classless action, and it says spend order, search your deck for 3 different items and show them to the player to your left, which obviously if you're playing one-on-one on your opponent, that player selects 1 item, put the selected item in your hand, and discard the others. So the whole point here is that the cost is you grab 3 cards from the deck, 1 of them you get to keep. Usually it's going to be the least powerful of the 3, and the other 2 go into your discard pile. The problem is that there are cards like Nodwick out there, and Nodwick says, order, spend Nodwick, equip an item in your discard pile this character can legally equip. So basically, obviously with Trader Routes, you're practically grabbing 2 of the 3, and you get to choose which 2 you want, because your opponent doesn't have a whole lot of leeway into what they're going to be grabbing. And the amazingness about the Trader Routes is that you don't even have to like look at X amount of cards at the top. You literally search your deck for whatever 3 cards you want, 3 different items. And so yeah, definitely something that's easily abusable. And so what they're trying to do here is just minimize the abuse possible here. It still exists. You can only have 1 of them in your deck though. So on to the ban list. This is the outright banned. These are cards that you no longer play with. There are 2 cards here. This first one is a bit convoluted, this combination of cards. I did have a personal experience with this, and it was very unpleasant. The reality is, this particular combo stonewalled the game. I couldn't win, and I had to just wait for the opponent to eventually destroy me. And it was not cool. It was definitely a negative player experience, and so I very much understand why this was banned. So what it is, Healer's Pact. It's a very nondescript card. It says, it's a level 5 cleric item. It says, react after this cleric removes or reduces 1 or more wounds, put a charge on Healer's Pact. And then react, before a character you control suffers wounds, remove 4 charges, reduce the wounds by 1. And so basically the whole point, the logic of this is that obviously for every 4 wounds you reduce, you get 1 free wound that you get to reduce. The problem is the abuse here is with a couple of other cards. Now, again, a very nondescript card that I saw this way back when and never thought this would ever be useful. Pain Conduit. It's a level 5 cleric item. It's unique. It's cursed, so you can only have 1 in play. Before another character in your army suffers wounds which are not a cost, reduce the wounds by 1, and this character suffers a wound. It has a spend order as well. Spend order, discard Pain Conduit. But that's irrelevant. You don't want that. You actually want wounds to be removed. Because now, if this character has Pain Conduit and Healer's Pact on it, he is now removing a wound from something. So he's generating 1 counter, or 1 charge on the Healer's Pact. The next card for this combo is Figurine of Protection. It's a level 8. It was printed classless. It has been MSRP'd, or it's been errated as a cleric item. So it's a level 8 cleric item. It says order. Put Figurine of Protection into play adjacent to this character as a level 4 cleric with +5 attack, 14 AC, 7 skill, 2 hit points, and the ability. React before an adjacent character in this rank suffers wounds. This character suffers the wounds instead. Okay, so the setup here is basically you need to have a character with Pain Conduit equipped and Healer's Pack equipped in some rank, either the 2nd, 3rd, 4th rank, something like that. And then adjacent to that character, you need to have the character of the Figurine of Protection in play with a Healer's Pack equipped. So what happens? You have a frontline fighter, which is what I experienced in the front rank, and then he has these support characters in the 2nd or 3rd ranks. I do a wound to that front rank fighter, and then Pain Conduit removes that wound from that fighter and brings it to the character that has it equipped. Since that character has now reduced a wound from someone else, the Healer's Pact takes a charge, or has a charge. Now, because the Figurine of Protection is next to that character, Figurine of Protection's React now comes into play, and you remove that wound from the person who has Pain Conduit, bring it to the Figure of Protection. Figure of Protection has its own Healer's Pact equipped, and then you just Pain Conduit activates again automatically. It's not even a react, it just activates. And so now the wound has bounced back to the Pain Conduit, and so you put another charge on it, and then on, the Figurine of Protection can now react to remove that charge, and it bounces back and forth, which means that now you have infinite charges on your Healer's Pact, which means that you can now basically react before a character you control suffers wounds, remove 4 charges, reduce the wounds by 1. So you cannot kill your opposing army at all. You can't do anything to it. It's so frustrating. Personally, I have to say that this is definitely I fully agree with this ban. All right, last but not least, the decision that's generated the most controversy in the updated ban list is our beloved Dedalia. Dedalia's been around since the beginning of the game practically. She was printed in Assassin's Strike, so that was the first expansion of Warlord. And she's mechanically unique because she's a card that doesn't have an activated ability, but rather it's an unactivated ability. It's you put her into play, you draw a card. And that allowed her to be really cherished in certain decks, particularly Raziel, which you're not allowed to draw, but because it's not something that you willfully do, it's something that you have to do because it's an unactivated ability, it's a static ability, you get to draw. And she put her in the unique position now with the updated loyalty penalty, which is characters out of faction come into play stunned. Generally, that would stop characters from drawing because you'd have to react off of that. But because she has a static ability, any deck can play her, and she gives you that card. Dedalia is just a cantrip with no downside. And the fact that any faction can play her and still get that upside makes it out of character in reality.
Makes it lazy deck building.
Makes it for lazy deck building, and it makes, again, I specifically felt it. I was like, how can I make my deck better? Well, I can get rid of something that I don't really need to throw something in there that is a body for, anti-blitzing and allows me to draw something that I really do need. So it basically allows you to thin your deck. And the fact that Warlord is a game that's played with a relatively small deck as is, and you don't draw as many cards as other games, means that that extra card draw does have an impact on the game. I do fully understand why it was done. I can't say I'm glad about it, but I understand it, and I look forward to not having to use her all the time. So now that I'm removing 3 Dedalia from a lot of different decks, I've got a bunch of other cards I can throw into those decks that will probably be more in character for those decks. So frustrating, yes. Understood, yes. I do have to agree with the decision. Now, that particular conversation segues us into the last bit of news that we have going on, and that is that the next online tournament is going to be called the Quality of Life Ancients. So it has been discussed for as long as Warlord has been around, basically, how they could integrate a sideboard, an actual sideboard. So when I mention sideboard, I mean cards that could be in the deck but aren't. But in reality, a sideboard is part of the deck that just doesn't start in your deck. Like, it's something that you can switch out in further, rounds or games in a round. And mulligans have never been a thing in Warlord as well. So it's something that everyone's always wanted to toy with, but has never had the opportunity to actually do that. And so the Guardians of the Storm have taken the initiative that the next tournament is going to be an Ancients tournament with the new ban list, and they're going to be toying with now having a sideboard, or they're going to permit a sideboard and a mulligan. So you get one free mulligan. It's not like Magic where you have to put a card in. You have the option to do a mulligan if you want. And then with the sideboard, we get a 5-card sideboard. Now remember, Warlord is played with 50 cards. That includes 6 of your starting cards, so you only have 44 cards in your deck outright when you're starting the game as a minimum. 5 cards is about 10 to 12% of your deck. Obviously, the immediate comparison is Magic. Magic has 60 cards in the deck, and you get to have a 15-card sideboard, which is 25% of the deck. So it seems like maybe we need a few more cards in the sideboard. I'm not sure, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that have been wishing for this opportunity. This is obviously going to be a trial run. It's going to be great to see how it works, and I'm excited to give it a run myself, and hopefully I'll have the time to jump in and participate in the tournament. I hope you guys found my insights interesting. If you have any input into the video, please drop a comment below. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it and you want to see more content. And thanks again for watching. See you guys later. Bye-bye.